And that, my friends, is how America was made great once again. Breaking at this hour, Jimmy Sengenberger is currently at the crossroads of politics and economics. Radio broadcaster master, now the celeb on the web. He's the smarty of the party. He's in cahoots with the grassroots. Jimmy at the Crossroads brings you thought-provoking commentary, hard-hitting interviews, original satire, and the best bumper music known to man. Jimmy at the Crossroads!
Gonna talk money, gonna talk politics, great for all generations. Oh, what a great mix, I said. Gonna talk money, gonna talk politics, great for all generations. Oh, what a great mix. I got Jimmy at the Crossroads, making sense out of nonsense. People want answers, they want to understand. They come to the crossroads and Jimmy gives them the plan. I said, gonna talk money, gonna talk politics, great for all generations. Oh, what a great mix. I got Jimmy at the crossroads, making sense out of nonsense. Come on, Jimmy, what you got?
Hello, my friends, and once again, welcome to Jimmy at the Crossroads. I'm Jimmy Sengenberger, your host for the program, and as always, it is a pleasure and a privilege to be with you here on the show in partnership with the Washington Examiner, making sense out of nonsense, as the man Biff Gore sings, and bringing you engaging, intelligent talk, Sang style. Thanks so much for joining us. Good to have you with us on this Monday, April 6th. The stock market is up. Dow climbing more than 1,000 points as of this live broadcast. I think people are getting a little bit cheerier that maybe, just maybe, we could be seeing the light at the end of the tunnel. It will be something to watch, to be sure, and I think we need to see that light at the end of the tunnel. It's important that we do. So today we got a great lineup going on, Jimmy at the Crossroads. Joining me at the Crossroads from Europe, we will have Alex Berezow, who had a very interesting piece for USA Today last week. Stop the panic, don't let the coronavirus win. We'll talk with him about his thoughts on this. He is Vice President of Scientific Communications at the American Council on Science and Health. We will also talk with Major General Paul Vallely, U.S. Army retired, get his thoughts on the U.S. Navy captain who was fired from his post, removed from his post as captain of the U.S.S. Theodore Roosevelt, Captain Crozier. Was that wise? Was that the right thing to do? Should they have delayed it a little bit and not done it so suddenly, removed him? Should they have removed him at all? We'll talk with the Major General about that, and also his thoughts on the Defense Production Act and more. He's also chairman of the Stand Up America U.S. Foundation. Finally, we will be joined by A.B. Stoddard, Associate Editor at RealClearPolitics, get her perspective on some of the political dynamics going on today. Always enjoy a good conversation with A.B. Stoddard. But first, I want to begin for a few minutes by talking about the economy, the economic environment that we are now in, because there are suggestions that the economy could crater as much as 30% or more. We talked about this on Friday. Larry Kudlow, a little bit concerned about annualizing growth and so forth, because what some of the estimates are doing is taking a very negative second quarter and making that spread all throughout the year. I agree with Kudlow that that isn't the way to go, but the question is how long this will last in terms of the coronavirus economic shutdowns, and then with that in mind, how much of an economic impact could that have? The longer this goes, the longer it will take to recover. We could be seriously debilitating the economic recovery. And let's be clear about something, and that is that public health is critical, and that needs to be of significant import to all of our politicians, all of our elected officials. But at the same time, economic health is also public health. Now, we are hearing Anthony Fauci, Dr. Fauci, speaking his warnings and expressing his concerns about what's been happening across the country as far as trying to constrain this virus. In Cut 9, this is Dr. Fauci yesterday on CBS's Face the Nation, talking about how we are struggling to get this under control.
Despite the deaths that we may see, that mitigation is working and that you do have this outbreak under control?
I will not say we have it under control, Margaret. That would be a false statement. We are struggling to get it under control, and that's the issue that's at hand right now. The thing that's important is that what you see is increases in new cases, which then start to flatten out. But the end result of that you don't see for days, if not weeks, down the pike. Because as the cases go down, then you get less hospitalizations, less intensive care, and less death. So even though you're getting a really improvement in that the number of new cases are starting to flatten, the deaths will lag by 1 or 2 weeks or more. So we need to be prepared that even though it's clear that mitigation is working, we're still going to see that tail off of deaths.
Dr. Anthony Fauci, I have touted him as somebody who I think is trustworthy on understanding what this virus is doing and some of the specifics needed to constrain it, to flatten the curve, and to stop the spread. I do believe that it is important to take these sorts of steps. So when we look at it and we view Fauci's role, I would have to say that this idea of fire Fauci, hashtag fire Fauci, was trending yesterday. I think that's nonsensical, especially at this point in time. He's one person that in very many ways gives a lot of reassurance to Americans, understandably so. He's been providing expertise. He's been doing YouTube interviews in all sorts of different venues on cable news and traditional media to break things down. You cannot remove Fauci, and I don't think you should. But at the same time, Fauci's views are not the only ones that should be listened to. We need to consider the holistic aspects of this crisis and all its various components. And one thing that I have noticed is that we are seeing some who are saying you have to just accept that this could go on for months. Virginia, the state of Virginia, for example, has their shutdown order, stay-at-home order in place through June 10th. Now, one thing that I have noticed is that the primary people who broadly accept and are pushing the notion of a long-term shutdown, not just April, maybe May, maybe June, maybe on out to September, one that can last months. As just the simple reality, those who accept that and advocate for that, as well as a policy that we should embrace, they're not merely basing their views on science. Rather, they tend to be more supportive of government's role in society and more of a believer that government has the capability to provide for those in need. Ergo, they're just fine with months of a shutdown because they think the government has the capacity to provide for the needs of the people. But also, as I've said before, it's important to keep in mind that politicians are politicians. They're always making their decisions based on what they think is the way to go, but they have to consider that, for example, policy decisions based on science are not just based on science. They're based on interpretations of the data and science, and those who are crafting those policies are the ones who are making decisions based on the science, and they are interpreting it and determining what are the best policies to do it. In other words, policies based on the science are only as good as those interpreting the science, those interpreting the data, and those who are crafting those policies, and only as good as they take into account all the factors. Insofar as containing the spread of this virus is the goal, these policies would be sensible and shut down out into perpetuity. But there are more factors to keep in mind. When shaping policy, policymakers must consider all the different aspects, including the economic aspect. Because the longer this goes on, we're seeing now Wall Street Journal reporting 29% of the American economy is at a standstill now. The longer that this goes on economically, the more difficult it is to recover quickly because the economy will be debilitated. Now, I'm not saying we should stop these policies now. I think April 30th seems like a reasonable enough time period with which to get things under control. The next week or two are going to be very difficult. We need to do what we can to flatten the curve, but at a certain point, we must recognize that at least scaling back some of these policies is going to be essential, because we cannot simply turn to the government and say that the government is able to do all of these things and just provide for the people out into perpetuity. Recognize the components of the economy are average, everyday people doing what they can, working hard, trying to provide for their families and their livelihoods. It's not just Wall Street, investors over on Wall Street. It's average, everyday people who are trying to make ends meet. Putting them in this position of relying upon the government for potentially months on end is untenable. And we must keep that in mind as policymakers look ahead at what to do next. April 30th, all well and good. That's fine. I understand it. But I do think that once we get into May, it may well be necessary to start opening things up for the American people, because we cannot go out into perpetuity and just think, oh, let's do months of a shutdown like this. It's just not tenable, and I don't have faith in government, Republican or Democrat, to provide for millions of Americans for months on end. I'm Jimmy Sengenberger. We're going to take a quick break. We will talk with Alex Berezow of the American Council on Science and Health when we return here on Jimmy at the Crossroads, coming to you in partnership with the Washington Examiner.
Census Bureau, I need to take your census.
Hi.
All right, let's get started. Can you identify yourself?
Yeah, this is me.
When is your birthday?
September 15th.
What year?
Every year.
Race?
Republican.
Is this a house, an apartment, or mobile home?
Mobile apartment.
How many people are living in your home?
2.
How many people are not living in your home?
Approximately 7.8 billion other people. Minus 2.
Please identify all that apply. Samoan, Geneva, Milano, Brussels, Neapolitan, Danish.
Thin mint.
And finally, would you like to be a donor?
Oh, sure. Tonsils, toenails, and elbows.
Jefferson Quincy Washington III Esquire here, reporting from Auraria campus. Auraria, I don't know what that means, but apparently it has something to do with Aurarians. Name the 3 branches of government for me. 3 branches of government.
Yes, the White House.
Very good.
Judicial. God, I'm really bad at this stuff.
Legislative, judicial, and I can't remember the third. Legislative, judicial, and
The boss. What's he called?
Oh, the president?
And he's called the what branch? He's the CEO.
presidential. I don't know. Give me a hint.
It's not the pokey branch. It's not the leafy branch. It's not the branch with the beehive on it. Also known as, what's the president? He's the CEO. What does CEO stand for?
chief executive.
Executive, okay.
And
Executive.
executive.
And the executive.
Supreme Court is
The
Yeah, yes, this is why I'm not in government.
judicial.
The judicial.
Oh, judicial.
You have the House and the Senate, and they are called the legislature. So that would be
Legislative.
The legislative.
very nice. Legislative. Very. See, I'm smarter than I look. Of course, I'd have to be smarter than I look. Congress is divided up into two sections. What are they?
They are the
House of Representatives and the
oh my gosh, I took this class
It's not
like
the House
5
and
years
the
ago.
garage. It's the House and the
Senate.
The House and the Senate.
The House and the Senate. So easy. So what is a group of baboons called?
Congress.
And that's why that is apropos, actually. And how many years is one term for a congressperson?
1 year. Is it 1 year?
In Congress.
Is it more?
It's
4
more.
years?
4.
It's
5,
not
6.
4 years.
8.
4 years. It's 6 years. Well, actually, it's 2 years.
2.
2. She's good. She's good. For a representative, House of Representatives, 2 years. Senator.
Senator is it a year? Or
8.
4? 3?
Double that. Well, right. Oh, she got it right in the middle.
6.
It's 6 years. 6 it is.
6.
I'm a third name.
Thank you.
Yankee.
Doodle dandy.
Yes, very good. Very good. One of the first songs ever written, actually.
America's politics are crazy. The culture is in flux. That's why we work hard to help you keep up.
More politics, more culture, and more access.
We focus on the biggest stories of the day with some of the biggest names in politics and punditry.
Go to our website, WashingtonExaminer.com. Subscribe to our YouTube channel. Be sure to follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
Fans, let's welcome back your host of Jimmy at the Crossroads, Jimmy Sengenberger.
Rocking and rolling back on Jimmy at the Crossroads in partnership with the Washington Examiner, bringing you engaging, intelligent talk, Sang style, as we try to make sense out of nonsense and do our level best with that. Good to have you with us along for the ride on this Monday, April 6th, where because we see some signs of improvement amidst the COVID-19 coronavirus crisis, the stock market is a little bit higher, which is always nice to see, especially when we've had some steep declines. Now, in the last segment, I talked a little bit about how I believed that, sure, for the month of April, could make sense to continue with these economic shutdown policies here in the United States, because we do need to flatten the curve and slow the spread. But after we get through April, the idea that we can last for months on end, as some are suggesting we might just need to do in order to combat this crisis, this concern of a pandemic, that's untenable. We cannot abide by that idea. We need to keep in mind the wide range of aspects to this story. It's important to do so. That's why I was very struck by a column for USA Today on Friday or Saturday entitled "Stop the Panic, Don't Let the Coronavirus Win" by an American who is, it seems, stranded in Europe right now, Alex Berezow. He is a PhD microbiologist, vice president at the American Council on Science and Health, an analyst at Geopolitical Futures and a member of the USA Today Board of Contributors. And I'm so pleased to have Alex on to talk about his article, which resonated so much with me today. Alex, sir, welcome to the program. It's good to have you here.
Thanks for having me, Jimmy.
So what got you stranded in Europe? It seems that's what's going on, that you want to come back at some point. Tell us what's happening with you and how you are doing, by the way.
Well, fine. I mean, lockdown is lockdown, right? If you're locked down in Seattle, that's my home, or if you're locked down in Poland, where I am now, there's not really much of a difference. You're still inside the house. Can't go anywhere.
Fair enough. Absolutely. Well, I want to just get your sense for where we are from the science of all this, because everybody's talking about, and understandably so, you have to look at the science in making decisions. The data is critical. But as I was also saying before, and we'll get to this, the decisions that you make based on science are only as good as those interpreting the science and also those who are then crafting policy based on the science. But how do you assess where things are at in terms of the spread of this virus?
Well, it's hard to say at the moment. We know that the virus is continuing to spread. There are signs that it's not spreading as badly as it was. The problem is that the models upon which these spread, the predicted spread are based, they're sort of dodgy, and that's not on purpose. It's the inherent nature of predictive models. You really don't know what's going to happen. And there were models that predicted anywhere from 4,000 deaths to 1 or 2 million American deaths. So there's a lot of uncertainty. The consensus is about 200,000 American deaths, and that's what Dr. Fauci has been basing his advice on, and I believe that's what caused President Trump to say, okay, we need to go into a lockdown. Those are scary numbers, and the truth is that we're sort of in uncharted territory. The last time we had something like this was a century ago. It was 1918 that we had something that threatened millions of people. That year, we lost 675,000 people to influenza. Now, that's massive. We usually only lose about 30 or 40,000 people to influenza each year. So 675,000 back in 1918 was a huge death toll. So we're looking at something that is potentially catastrophic. The question, though, that we always have to consider, that we don't seem to be considering, is that every action has a consequence. And when you decide to shut down an economy, that itself will have consequences. And that was really the only thing I wanted people to consider from my column. I didn't actually offer any policy prescriptions. I just offered people something to chew on, which is the cure cannot be worse than the disease. And I fear that by shutting down an economy, we're threatening to have a cure that is worse than the disease.
How about the argument, though, that we need to flatten the curve and stop the spread, and the way in which to do that is to keep people at home, limit their contact with others, not just through social distancing when you are out and about, but try to limit the ability for people to even go out and about, to go to their jobs and so forth, at the very least for the month of April. My big contention is not so much that April is a bad thing in terms of having these shutdowns, even though it is doing great harm economically, because we do need to take steps to try to flatten the curve and slow this spread. But at the same time, there are some who are saying this should last for months. The order for the governor from Virginia, Ralph Northam, is June 10th. That's the deadline. And I don't see how we could just go through this extended period of time with the shutdown and rely upon the government to provide for our needs.
I don't see how a shutdown can last that long because the economy will give out. And there's simply a reality that we have to deal with, and that's that people have to have food on their table and money in their wallets. And at some point, people are going to say, you know what, I'll take my chances with the virus. I have to get back to work. I don't think that politicians and our public health officials are putting enough consideration into that reality, that this will not last forever. This cannot last forever. And that's really the reason that I wrote my column. I want people to think about the consequences of these draconian policies. Also, some of the societal changes that we're seeing. You know, where I live, there's a city called Bellevue, and they implemented a website where you could essentially snitch on people. So if you see somebody violating the stay-home order, you could report them to the to the city government, and the city government will come by, if they'll see if too many people are aggregating, they'll, I guess, tell them to move along or something. But it's really, we've decided to have a major change to the way our society works without so much as a debate.
Yeah.
And I've been very surprised to see something like this happen in the United States, where people who a couple of weeks ago would have been saying that they'll fight for our liberties are now just handing them over to the government rather eagerly.
Again, we're talking with Alex Berezow, who's a vice president at the American Council on Science and Health. Alex, one thing here in Colorado, where I'm broadcasting from, that's illegal is handshakes. If you shake somebody's hand, you could be liable to go into jail and have a $1,000 fine, which I just think is outrageous, going to your point of this idea of no debate for these very significant changes to how our society is functioning. Now, there are some very good approaches that have been taken as far as the social distancing. I think that seems very reasonable. Let's keep people 6 feet apart and try to limit the exposure and some of those kinds of steps. The question is more, it comes to me to a matter of timing. I mean, you talk about in your article here for USA Today how James Bullard, the president of the Federal Reserve Bank of St. Louis, predicted that we're facing an unemployment rate of 30% and an unprecedented drop in GDP of 50%. Those numbers are worse than what we experienced during the Great Depression. Hopefully the $2 trillion rescue package will prevent something that catastrophic. But the question is, how long can that $2 trillion package actually last before those resources are already exhausted? And then we have to do what the Democrats are suggesting, which is a phase 4.
Well, I'm afraid that we're going to find out, and that we won't have to theorize and hypothesize about what's going to happen, because it seems that we're on a trajectory to continue this shutdown almost indefinitely and trying to rescue our economy through bailouts. Now, I'm not an economist, but that doesn't seem to me to be a sustainable long-term solution. We have to get back to work. And I certainly don't think that it's unreasonable to ask places like Seattle, where we're having an awful lot of cases, or places like New York City, for them to go on lockdown and to shut down schools and businesses. That makes total sense. But in other parts of the country, it would seem to be that we need to move toward a model in which healthy people are allowed to work, and the sick and the exposed are required to stay home. The elderly are required to stay home. But we need to slowly work our way out of this, because if not, I'm afraid we're facing some very tough economic times ahead. People don't realize, because it's been so long, people don't realize how bad the Great Depression was. It wasn't a typical cyclical recession like the global financial crisis from 2008. It was devastating. People were committing suicide. People were living in cardboard boxes. I mean, it was awful. And so when people become desperate because they don't have money, they don't have a way of making a living, true misery sets in. And to think that we're on a potential trajectory to repeat economic numbers that are as bad or worse than that, we really need to think about this before we continue on our path that we're still going down.
So you're a PhD microbiologist, means you're a scientist, and of course you're talking about and expressing concern, Alex Berezow, about the economic aspects of all of this. How do you think policymakers need to balance the concern for public health and the concern for economic health, which, by the way, does go hand in hand with public health? You can't truly say that they are mutually exclusive, but how would you advise policymakers to balance that, just in the thought process, not necessarily go ahead and move forward with this particular policy, but as they develop policies for moving forward after April 30th?
Well, there's a way that economists do stuff like this, and there's a way that I think insurance companies do the same thing, which is you try to figure out what all the costs are of the policy that you're doing versus the cost of the other policy, right? And it's hard to do that, right? Because when you're weighing the costs of things, you're weighing things like illnesses and deaths, and it's hard to put a price tag on those things, but that's exactly what economists do. They have to. And then you weigh and you see, well, at what point does the lockdown turn into a net negative effect? Right now, I think arguably we could say that the lockdown's having a net positive effect. It's slowed down the virus. Not as many people are going to get sick. Not as many people are going to die. But at some point, be it this month or May or June, the net positive of the lockdown is going to turn into a net negative. And economists need to figure out when that point is, and we need to change trajectory before then. That would be the general strategy that I would advise the president and his economic advisors and his public health advisors to consider when deciding how much longer we need to be on lockdown.
Before we let you go, I want to get your response to former Vice President Joe Biden, who is, of course, running for President of the United States. This is cut one where he was specifically asked if the cure is worse than the disease.
The president has said many times now he's worried that the cure is going to be worse than disease. Does that concern you at all? And isn't there a point there that if this lockdown goes on for too long, the public health concerns could be grave?
Well, the public health concerns can be grave. And, you saw what's happening in Singapore. They moved very rapidly to bring down the coronavirus down to zero. And then they began to open up. They had very, very tight restrictions in terms of social distancing, et cetera, staying in place. Now it's coming back. And so, we've got what we need most of all, and it's not the president's fault at all, but we need most of all vaccine. But in the meantime, we have to take all the efforts we can to make sure we prevent the spread, lower that curve, as they talk about, and move from there. And that's why I think, George, we're going to need not only this last CARES Act that the Congress passed, which did a great deal, we're going to need at least 2 more iterations of that, I believe.
Your response, Alex Berezow.
Well, I mean, everybody's giving the best advice that they can, and I'm pleased to see that Vice President Joe Biden didn't make anything political. I think that at this point in time, we need to have Americans unified and trying not to take political shots. So I was pleased to see the Vice President do that. Whether or not we can do 2 more tranches of stimulus package, again, like I said, I'm not an economist, but I don't think it's a sustainable thing. I mean, the U.S. economy is, $20 trillion approximately? I don't think that it's sustainable to pass multi-trillion-dollar stimulus packages. I mean, it just doesn't sound like that's something that we can do realistically. The vice president is correct that we do need a vaccine. We're working on that. Scientists are working on that. The bigger hope right now is probably an antiviral. We can probably get something maybe by the summer or within a couple of months. There are some antibodies that can help fight the virus that other scientists are working on, but a vaccine probably will be at least a year or 2 away. Those vaccines are very, they have to be tested very thoroughly. And so we shouldn't hang our hopes on a vaccine anytime soon.
Alex Berezow, Vice President of Scientific Communications at the American Council on Science and Health. Thanks so much for joining us from Poland. We appreciate your time, and best of luck to you. I hope you can return to the States soon.
At some point, yeah.
All right. Alex, thank you so much. Really appreciate the time.
Thanks.
Once again, Alex Berezow joining us here on Jimmy at the Crossroads. We're going to take a break, and when we come back, we will be joined by Major General Paul Vallely, U.S. Army retired, to get his thoughts on the firing, the removal from his post as captain of the U.S.S, Theodore Roosevelt, of Captain Crozier. Looking forward to this conversation, and we'll talk other topics with General Vallely as well. So keep it right here. Jimmy at the Crossroads. I'm Jimmy Sengenberger, coming to you in partnership with the Washington Examiner. Okay, welcome to the auditions for the official voice of Jimmy at the Crossroads. Name, please?
Kermit the Frog.
Okay, go ahead.
Hi-oh, Jimmy the show host here.
Next.
Next. I told you they wouldn't go for it, Froggy. Hiya!
And you are?
Stewie Griffin.
Can you sing a bumper song?
Oh, absolutely. La 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 la, la 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 la. This is so beneath me.
Thank you. Okay, next, previous experience in voice work.
I was a duck.
Next.
Affleck.
Okay, Dr. Evil, you're up.
Okay, everyone. Welcome to Jimmy at the frickin' Crossroads. We invite you to watch for $1 billion.
Mr. Simpson.
What?
Mr. Simpson!
Who's talking?
Mr. Simpson!
What?
Over here!
Oh, hey.
Let's hear the announcer voice.
I can't do an announcer voice. Oh, but I can do Mr. Burns. Announcer guy, eh? Excellent.
George W. Bush.
I'm here to auditionify for the announcerification process there for Jimmy Mushroomburger.
It's Sengenberger.
Jimmy In-N-Out Burger.
Next. And you are?
The name is Doc Brown.
Okay, go ahead, please.
Welcome back to the Crossroads.
I love your enthusiasm. When can you start?
Last year. I was trading derivatives when I got hit by an unexpected collapse of the market. My firm was in serious trouble until I found out we were too big to fail. When I called Dodd-Frank, Dewey, Cheatham, and Howe, they told me that because our financial company is so big, the government will never let us fail, no matter what harebrained investment strategy we employ. With their guarantee of protection, they made me whole. Now I don't have to worry about being too big to fail anymore. They gave me every reassurance I need, and they'll predict the future. And, sorry about the foreclosure on your house. It's just a little side effect. They're going to make that right, too. 1.25 trillion, 1 trillion, 2.4 trillion. Not only do we get the big bailouts, but we get them fast. The Consumer Financial Protection Bureau doesn't want you to know how much money we get for our clients. But don't worry about it. Call us. We're Dodd-Frank, Dewey, Cheatham, and Howe, the deep pockets.
America's politics are crazy. The culture is in flux. That's why we work hard to help you keep up.
More politics, more culture, and more access.
We focus on the biggest stories of the day with some of the biggest names in politics and punditry.
Go to our website, WashingtonExaminer.com. Subscribe to our YouTube channel. Be sure to follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
Welcome back to Jimmy at the Crossroads. I'm Jimmy Sengenberger. Great to be with you today, as always, in partnership with the Washington Examiner. Appreciate you being along for the ride on this Monday, April 6th. Thanks for joining us. We try to make sense out of nonsense. There is a big story that has been taking over the airwaves in many respects over the past few days. The media has been very attentive to the removal of Captain Brett Crozier from the U.S.S. Theodore Roosevelt. Now, the U.S.S. Theodore Roosevelt is a ship with a crew of about 5,000 sailors. And it has weaponry on there, nuclear material. It is a very sensitive and important ship. So with the spread of this coronavirus on there, over 100 have tested positive on board. The captain, Brett Crozier, was very concerned about his crew and sent a letter on which he copied 20 to 30 other individuals on that notification. And it ended up being leaked out to the press. I want to play a clip here to help set the stage a little bit. This is cut 4, Navy Secretary Thomas Modly speaking on the fired captain and what happened.
Today, at my direction, the commanding officer of the U.S.S. Theodore Roosevelt, Captain Brett Crozier, was relieved of command by Carrier Strike Group Commander Rear Admiral Stuart Baker. The executive officer, Captain Dan Keeler, has assumed command temporarily until such time as Rear Admiral Select Carlos Sardiello arrives in Guam to assume command. We all understand and cherish our responsibilities, and frankly, our love for all of our people in uniform. But to allow those emotions to color our judgment when communicating the current operational picture can, at best, create unnecessary confusion and, at worst, provide an incomplete picture of American combat readiness to our adversaries. When the commanding officer of the U.S.S. Teddy Roosevelt decided to write his letter on the 30th of March, 2020, that outlined his concerns for his crew in the midst of the COVID-19 outbreak, the Department of the Navy had already mobilized significant resources for days in response to his previous requests. On the same day marked on his letter, my Chief of Staff called the CO directly at my direction to ensure he had all the resources necessary for the health and safety of his crew. Worse, the captain's actions made his sailors, their families, and many in the public believe that his letter was the only reason help from our larger Navy family was forthcoming, which was hardly the case. I could reach no other conclusion that Captain Crozier had allowed the complexity of his challenge with the COVID breakout on the ship to overwhelm his ability to act professionally, when acting professionally was what was needed most at the time. We do, and we should, expect more from the commanding officer of our aircraft carriers.
That's the argument from Navy Secretary Thomas Modly for why Captain Crozier was removed from command, relieved of command. So when I said fired before, that's what I meant, was removed from his post as captain of the U.S.S. Theodore Roosevelt. Was that compelling? Was that appropriate on the part of the Navy Secretary and those underneath his command to make this decision to remove the captain? Or was the captain just doing his level best to provide his people with notice, with a heads up that something was wrong with his crew and with the coronavirus spread? Let's talk about it with Major General Paul Vallely, U.S. Army retired, who's also chairman of Stand Up America U.S. Foundation and has been a military analyst on the Fox News channel. General Vallely joins us now. Sir, welcome to Jimmy at the Crossroads. So great to have you.
Thank you, Jimmy. Happy to be with you.
So, sir, let me just ask you right up front. Do you think the Navy was within its rights to make this decision, and was it the right decision to make, especially at this point in time?
Well, it's a great question, and it deals with a number of issues here, which I'll be happy to explain to you. The carrier had docked previously off of Da Nang, Vietnam, and that's probably where they picked up and got infected, the crew members, some, I guess, 300. So at that time, the aircraft carrier went back into the South China Sea. Now, here's what has to be done. The Navy Secretary didn't like the way he handled it. Certainly down through the chain of command, 4 levels down almost from the Secretary of the Navy, would be the captain of that aircraft carrier working for a fleet admiral. And so the fleet admiral had to make the call, not the Secretary of the Navy on that. But here's the thing. When you look at readiness and you look at what signals you may be sending to our adversaries, you must keep any vulnerability of our force or of the members of that sailors on that aircraft carrier. The protocol is you have to keep that in the chain of command. And you don't make a mistake by writing a letter that is messaged out to a number of different recipients. So he did make a mistake. He's well respected. He should be put back, in command somewhere along the line and not have his career ruined because of this. He's served too many years and he's a good combat warrior, and that's what we need. So hopefully this will just be a slap on the hands, and they're going to give him a good position and reinstate him again. That's what I would recommend.
In other words, penalize him for the time being for what he did in terms of allowing this letter to be leaked. I mean, we don't know that he allowed it to be leaked, but the question is, how in the world could it have happened, and why did he CC so many people?
Yeah, that's exactly, and that's a mistake. Commanders make a mistake continually, but in the military with discipline and protocol, I've forgiven a lot of my commanders, even in combat in Vietnam, who made some mistakes that I thought at the time. But certainly I counseled them, and I didn't get them fired or relieved of command at that point in time for messaging, for example, and communications. but we can't give away any vulnerabilities to our fleet forces and to our armed forces to the Chinese or the Russians or whoever. So it was a mistake made, but it should be rectified. And he needs to be reinstated, in my opinion, Jimmy.
And that, to me, Major General Paul Vallely, U.S. Army retired, is the crux of the matter. I asked a friend of mine who's been on this program. He's a former military intelligence contractor for about 15 years, including the last decade of the Cold War, Keith Nobles. And he said this, I wanted to share it with you and get your reaction. How sick the military may or may not be must be highly classified information available on a need-to-know basis only. Sharing that information with those who did not need to know is unacceptable. And that's where the media, I think, is missing this. They're trying to say that this captain was removed from duty because, relieved of his position, because he was warning the administration, in essence, about this. And the Trump administration, Navy Secretary on up, wanted to hide it. But this seems to me to be what's really going on, is China and Russia were able to get news of what's happening with a very important carrier.
That's right, vulnerability, how it affects force readiness and the perception of our enemies, like China, for example. So it was a mistake made, and the media blows up a lot of different things, the fake news. They try to blame Trump, and this guy's this and that. We know he's a good commander. We know he's well educated. He's a trained warrior. And so the mistake was made, and at some point he needs to be forgiven here by the chain of command and the admirals that he works for.
Major General Vallely, let's look at this cut 6. This is his crew. His crew very enthusiastic and cheering for the captain as he was leaving his post there after having been removed by the Navy. They're shouting, Captain Crozier. What does that tell you, especially because the media is putting this up as an example of how the crew idolized it, which is understandable. It was their captain, and he's at a minimum, he was trying to let people know about his concerns. It's how he did it that seems to be particularly problematic. But what do you make of that, especially as someone who has commanded many men in our uniform?
Well, number one, you can tell he was very well respected by the crew members. So that means he's a good commander when you have that kind of respect. And so from that standpoint, they were basically messaging out that we respect this man, we respect him as a commander. They probably realized maybe he made a mistake, but they're not going to say that. But it still goes back to the main issue, Jimmy, that he made a mistake, and this could be rectified. We didn't have anybody killed because of it, but on the other hand, it showed some vulnerability of that particular aircraft carrier. And so that's the core of the issue.
General Vallely, let's shift gears because I'm curious your thoughts overall on the national security implications of the spread of this virus. Obviously, policymakers are doing everything they can to flatten the curve and slow the spread. We're now in the midst of what they're calling 30 days to slow the spread, and this could be the worst week that America will face as far as deaths as a result of this horrible, horrible pandemic. What do you make of it, in particular, the concern now for America? I mean, we're being told by military officials that America's readiness is not at top notch, which of course we need. And maybe, just maybe, China, Russia, they could take advantage of what's going on here, even though they have been dealing with their own health issues in their own country.
Well, our readiness is at a new high level due to the money and support that President Trump has given to the Department of Defense after it was totally, I would say, decreased under the Obama administration. Terrible what happened to our Defense Department and our readiness. Now the morale is up. We have the fleets out there. As you may have noticed, we charged up the Atlantic Fleet to send some of our ships down off Mexico because the increase of cartel activity south of our border. We've also increased the fleet forces that went through the Sea of Hormuz into the Persian Gulf to offset an Iranian threat. We still have the Chinese threat. So there's a balance that the commanders are doing right now to make sure we have our readiness. We're ready to neutralize or take out any threat to the United States or its citizens. At the same time, trying to manage the virus within the forces right now. And everyone should know we have great medical people in the armed forces. We have great hospitals, great doctors, great nurses. And so those soldiers and sailors are going to be well taken care of until we can get past this infectious disease.
Major General Paul Vallely, U.S. Army retired, our guest here on Jimmy at the Crossroads. Again, appreciate your time. I want to ask you about the Defense Production Act. I'm deeply concerned about the implementation of this in this case. I understand that the U.S. military has carried out many logistical operations for military defense purposes, but I don't feel comfortable, I have to say, as a free market person with the government taking the initiative in this way and in many regards nationalizing important supply chains, not just saying, go ahead and manufacture these masks, for example, N95 masks or ventilators, although I do have some issues when companies are already stepping up of their own accord of having the federal government make those demands. But, okay, that's one thing. But when I see an admiral get up there and say, of course, under orders from the President of the United States, but talking about how they're micromanaging supply chains, that makes me feel uncomfortable. As somebody who doesn't like the government controlling things in our lives, what do you make of the Defense Production Act and its usage right now by the President?
First of all, that act is set forth because of crises and threats to our national security. And the corporations involved in the supply chain operations don't necessarily have the intelligence that our president does or our Defense Department admirals and generals have. And so our logistics, supply logistics in the military is so effective and so well thought out, computerized, all of that is in there. The American military are always called upon, earthquakes, whatever happens, tsunamis, because they can react quicker than anybody can, quicker than corporations can, because we can alert the forces and then we can deploy those forces to neutralize whatever that threat or assist in a crisis such as an earthquake or a tsunami that we've seen in the past. And so that Defense Act will not be overused by the Trump administration. But if there is a supply chain operation that's not effective or a corporation's not following that, like 3M Company, then the president's authorized to direct them to do certain things under this act. And I think it's right to do, but certainly we don't want anything federalized. That's not what we're talking about. What we're talking about is having these corporations understand what's going on and then prioritize the flow in that supply chain. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, I follow along. My concern comes with the idea that, look, I mean, I have tremendous respect for the military, which is why it's difficult to make this particular criticism for me. But to say that in a crisis situation, we can have the government will be able to know how to go about this. But in our daily, day-to-day lives as Americans in the economy, the government doesn't know how to do it. I just find a contradiction as an American who looks at the socialist countries that have failed against the United States over history in the last 100 years to then think that, well, this is an example where in a crisis situation, the government's really good at handling these supply chains. But day-to-day, I find it hard to make that argument. And then on the other hand, say day-to-day, we shouldn't have the government in charge of our economy.
Well, when you talk about the government, you're talking about Homeland Security, you're talking about Treasury, you're talking about all these different administrations within a government. But separate that out from the military, because that's completely different from the other organizations within our government. As we've seen them, defeat the two superpowers in World War II, the Nazis and the Japanese. You can see that we can be on alert and we can take on that particular threat immediately. We can hit any target 24 hours a day anywhere in the world. That's how sophisticated we are and how great our technology is. So you can't just bunch DOD in with all the other bureaucratic deep state organizations. It's just a different way
I see what you're saying.
Have to look at it.
Sure, fair enough. Major General Paul Vallely, U.S. Army retired. We just got another minute or two with you, and I would be remiss if I didn't ask you to tell us a little bit about your organization, Stand Up America U.S. Foundation. I would welcome the opportunity to hear about it, share it with our viewers.
Well, thank you. Well, we've been in existence since 2005. It is the Stand Up America U.S. Foundation, not just Stand Up America. In 2015, George Soros funded a group called Stand Up America to counter me. And so we have to make sure when you Google it, it's Stand Up America U.S. Foundation. Our website is standupamericaus.org, standupamericaus.org. We also put out a newsletter every 2 weeks, but go to our website. We've been posting a lot of good material on that in the last 2 days. So we need your support continually to the foundation. Any way you can help us spread the word, donate, we'll appreciate that. That will keep us alive and well.
General Vallely, such a pleasure and a treat to have you on the show. I hope you will come back, and I appreciate your insights today. Thank you.
Absolutely, Jimmy. Be happy to.
Again, Major General Paul Vallely, U.S. Army retired, joining us here on the show. Great conversation. And also chairman of Stand Up America U.S. Foundation. Be sure to check them out. We're going to take another break here on Jimmy at the Crossroads with yours truly, Jimmy Sengenberger, doing what we can to make sense out of nonsense and bring you engaging, intelligent talk, Sang style, in partnership with the Washington Examiner. When we return, our next guest will be A.B. Stoddard, who's an associate editor at RealClearPolitics, also has many times, been on Fox News Channel over the years. Looking forward to talking with A.B. coming up as we continue on Jimmy at the Crossroads. Stay with us.
And now, the further future adventures of Starship Winkler. The captain finds himself up against a worthy adversary, a meteor maid.
Oh, come on. I was only in there 2 parsecs.
You can't double park here. You're in a twilight zone.
I didn't see the signpost up ahead.
Plus, your plates are expired.
Hold on. I've got an idea. This is not the double-parked starship you are looking for.
This is not the... Oh, come on, really? You're gonna try and pull mind tricks? What do I look like, a Gungan?
Misa thought it would work.
Here you go, Captain Schnook.
Ah, womp rats. A summons?
See you in court.
You mean I gotta come back all the way across the galaxy? Oh, look. This is right in the middle of Ponfar. And if I miss it, it's another 7 years.
Tough tribbles.
Well, was the captain really parked in a twilight zone? Will there be a twist ending? Tune in next time when we hear...
Look, maybe we can, work something out.
What do you have in mind?
A couple passes to the Space of Palooza Festival, free parking.
I will see you in court. You will pay in full. Sign here, please.
You will see me in court. I will pay in full. I have signed here.
Thank you. Have a nice day.
What the... How does she do that?
On Starship Winkler.
America's politics are crazy. The culture is in flux. That's why we work hard to help you keep up.
More politics, more culture, and more access.
We focus on the biggest stories of the day with some of the biggest names in politics and punditry.
Go to our website, WashingtonExaminer.com. Subscribe to our YouTube channel. Be sure to follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
To Obamacare.
Pardon me. Pardon me. Oh, hey, you must be Freddie May. Frederick, please. Yeah, whatever. Hey, listen, I'm Bill O'Goods with OSLAP. That's Obama's Student Loan Acceleration Program. And we just passed Obamacare, right? We're about to pass another bill to nationalize student loans. It's going to be a whole federal takeover.
Excuse me, sir. Could I get you a drink?
Yes. Do you have a Lady Gaga?
Of course. One moment, please.
How does this benefit SCALP, the Society of College Academics for Loan Proliferation?
Well, I'm glad you asked. More loans equals more money. That's more money for everybody. You could raise your tuition excrementally in perpetuity forever, and there's nothing they can do about it. You still got to go to school, right? You still got to get a loan. You ain't got no money. It's a win-win. Oh, and here's another thing. You can't discharge student debt
by bankruptcy. You could have 3 student loans, you could go you can't declare bankruptcy on any of them. I don't care how much money you don't got.
But what about the students?
The who?
This.
Remember, my friend, here at OSLAP, we make money the old-fashioned way. We steal it from the students. This is for you.
So what you're saying is, this is a gold mine.
Indeed it is.
A gold mine.
A gold mine.
Stop! Let me tell you what's really going on with student loan debt today. You see, in 2010, President Barack Obama nationalized the student loan system, tying it to Obamacare. At that point in time, student loan debt across the country totaled $800 billion. Now, about a decade later, that number has doubled to $1.6 trillion. This is particularly because the federal government keeps giving out the loans, which has allowed colleges and universities to blithely increase their tuition without any concern. And the federal government just keeps giving out the loans because guess what? If your borrower is deeply indebted with student loan debt, you cannot discharge that debt in bankruptcy. You're stuck with it for life. That needs to change, particularly because there's no risk to the lender. That means the federal government can keep giving out loans, and also there's no risk to the colleges and universities. So they'll just keep raising tuition regardless. There really does need to be a congressional action done to address this student loan crisis in America. And at the Millennial Policy Center, we have some great extensive research on how to do this, including some bills working their way through Congress. So log on to millennialpolicycenter.org today to learn more.
Right on.
Well, it's going to be a pretty good decade. Freddie, let's have another.
Oh, sure. Let me just.
And folks, let's welcome back your host of the Crossroads, Mr. Jimmy Sengenberger, the final segment of today's show.
Thank you, Nathan Matoush, working the Matoush Magic, producer extraordinaire here on Jimmy at the Crossroads in partnership with the Washington Examiner. Great to be with you once again today, bringing you engaging, intelligent talk, saying style. Appreciate you joining us, and also appreciate Alex Berezow from the American Council on Science and Health joining us earlier, as well as Major General Paul Vallely, U.S. Army retired. With fascinating insights today here on the show. Now I want to talk a little bit about handling the crisis and other matters, especially from a political standpoint. And now there's talk, Joe Biden yesterday was on the Sunday shows talking about the possibility, prospect of a virtual convention for the Democrats. What are we to make of all these different machinations? I'm very excited to welcome for the first time to Jimmy at the Crossroads, A.B. Stoddard, who's an associate editor and columnist at RealClearPolitics. And of course, you've seen her many a time on the Fox News channel. She joins us here today. A.B., welcome. Good to have you.
Nice to be with you, Jimmy.
Thank you so much for taking the time. So I just want to play a clip here to help set the stage, talk for a few minutes about the coronavirus pandemic. In Cut 7, this is President Donald Trump yesterday at his coronavirus press conference talking about what will happen in the coming weeks.
All of us are going to be working very hard. We're working very hard. We are really coming up into a time that's going to be very horrendous, probably a time like we haven't seen in this country, wouldn't you say? I mean, I don't think we've seen a time like this in the country. And we're getting to that point where it's going to really be some very bad numbers. We want to keep those numbers a lot lower than they would have been, and we will do that. We have tremendous talent working. We have tremendous people, and that includes governors. That includes everybody. Everybody's working. But unfortunately, we're getting to that time when the numbers are going to peak, and it's not going to be a good-looking situation. I really believe we probably have never seen anything like these kind of numbers, maybe during the war, during a World War, a World War I or II or something, but this is a war all unto itself, and it's a terrible thing.
I have to say, and that was Breitbart had pulled that clip, I have to say that this is strong language coming from the President of the United States talking about horrendous in terms of what we're going to see. Now, was that just the stark reality, or should the President maybe have phrased things a little differently to be more encouraging to the American people?
Well, I think, Jimmy, at times the scientists have made it clear that the President has been a little too hopeful in a lot of his estimations and assessments about prospective therapeutic medicines and timelines and numbers, social distancing protocols. Obviously, the tape tells the truth about the way the president talked about this virus in January and February and halfway through March. So he's coming around to talk about it in grave terms to prepare the American people for a lot that could have been mitigated much earlier and a lot that could have been avoided. It's clear from the modeling that we're heading into a really bad part of peaks around the country that I think will last in some places into late April and May. And I don't know that we have a handle on what the exact numbers are. He's, of course, put the potential total death toll at between 100 and 240,000 Americans. That will depend, of course, on the social distancing that we're all exercising now and will for the weeks to come, whether or not in the 8 remaining states without shelter-in-place orders, people are going to individually take responsibility to take these precautions without direction from their Republican governors. And also it will depend on the capacity of the hospitals and whether or not they can keep the number of deaths down, because they will be besieged by infected people without the protective gear we know they desperately need, and without the life-saving ventilators that they're going to need more of. New Orleans reaching its capacity this week. A lot of states have hotspots where they're worried about the number of ventilators. So I think it's overdue that the president is speaking about it in grave and serious language. I think that he still is running a government response that is a response. It's a reaction, and there is no plan at this point to contain the spread of the virus. That would demand a national testing regime or a national lockdown or both. And as of today, we have neither.
So Dr. Anthony Fauci has been the leading guy behind all this. I mean, I've called him the most trusted man in America when it comes to telling us about the specifics on this pandemic, the specifics on coronavirus, what to keep in mind, things to watch for, and so forth. And he's facing a lot of criticism. In fact, yesterday I saw #FireFauci was trending. I think it was started by some conservatives who weren't too pleased with him, and then you had liberals who were, and others who were taking it up and saying, hey, no, we shouldn't #FireFauci. Now, I'm of the mindset that it would be stupid to do so, and I don't agree with some of his policy prescriptions per se, but I think the guy knows what he's talking about. He's been around the block 1 or 2 times, and I was curious your thoughts on this idea of removing Fauci by some people who are not liking his approach, shall we say.
I think it's really ugly that allies of the president and supporters of the president have found reason to try to malign Dr. Fauci, our foremost expert in this country, really in the world. We are lucky to have him. He has advised presidents for 50 years. We don't have this kind of expertise. And as you mentioned, this kind of a trusted leader on every block. We are desperate for leadership right now. The administration cost us 2 critical months, and we're way behind the curve. Dr. Fauci said last Thursday, Jimmy, he doesn't understand why we don't have a national lockdown. And the idea of him being muzzled at the president's press conference last night, I shouldn't call it a press conference because it's not really a press conference if he can muzzle Fauci, but he wanted to obviously tout the potential of hydrochloroquine, and Dr. Fauci has been very cautious about how it needs to go through trials to be certified as as an effective therapy for COVID-19. It is, as you know, a vital drug for people with lupus and rheumatoid arthritis. And it's worked as an anti-malarial. So the idea that we would be causing shortages for people who need it when it hasn't been proven for COVID-19 is of great concern to Dr. Fauci. But people who want to tout, the potential benefits of this drug have crowded him out online, and it's led to not only conspiracies about him, but death threats. And that's why he has a 9-agent detail now protecting him, because we have sickos in this country who have threatened to kill him.
A.B. Stoddard joining us, Associate Editor at RealClearPolitics. When we look at the politics of all this, it is pretty striking to see some political swipes being taken at the president from Democrats and from Republicans to Democrats, especially when we talk about the stimulus debate and so forth, and how that played out in the previous couple of weeks. But Joe Biden, one thing that I have to give credit for Joe Biden is that he's been, when pressed, do you think that President Trump bears responsibility for the lives that have been lost in these ways? I mean, Chuck Todd last weekend had specifically asked him, does he have blood on his hands, or is that too harsh? And then Joe Biden says, I think that's too harsh. And I have to, at least on that level, while he's expressing some disagreements on some of the policy aspects with this, I'm glad that Joe Biden hasn't taken a very hard-hitting sort of political or partisan slant against President Trump. To his credit, I have to say.
Yeah, I think the former vice president is trying to make the argument that the president is incompetent, and his response at a governmental, operational, mechanical level was a debacle. The former vice president's made this clear in his ads, as you've seen. But he's not going to try to get into a political food fight right now when this is a dire story about people dying, and many people around us, Jimmy, who have not been laid off or lost their health insurance or lost loved ones, going into harm's way every day to load up the shelves of the grocery stores, work at the post office, be on the front lines in our healthcare system, and either to protect us or for fear of losing their job and having nothing left. So Joe Biden is a compassionate man, and that's what's really on his mind. He knows that the story of the Trump administration's response to this pandemic will be told all year long as we come out of flattening the curve and then again prepare for another fall, November version of a rebound of the virus as we try to create new protections for the next pandemic, that will be a time for Joe Biden to make his case that we need a more competent president at the helm next year, and that the president does not deserve re-election. But I don't think Joe Biden is going to get out there and throw out some tacky slugs at President Trump right now. He understands that people are really hurting.
One thing that we've been talking about here is I'm fine with the notion of these shutdowns. I mean, there's a lot of discomfort with it, and I have to say, I'm not on board with a national shutdown. I don't believe that the federal government should have that particular authority, but I'm not somebody who says, look, like I'm in Colorado, and we have one of these stay-at-home orders, and while I appreciate the way that Governor Polis had gone about this before issuing the stay-at-home order, I'm not, for this month of April, I'm fine with that. I get it. I understand the reasoning and the rationale, but I don't know how long this can really last beyond that because of the economic damage. It can be particularly debilitating to the economy in terms of recovering, and to be honest, I say this as a small government guy, I don't trust the government's ability to provide for those who are in need for an extended period of time on such a mass scale. I don't think the government's capable of doing that at the federal level. What do you think?
Forgive my phone for going.
That's okay. It's the world of COVID-19. A.B. Stoddard joining us here on the show, here on Jimmy at the Crossroads.
Here we go.
It's what happens. Okay, we've got A.B. There you go.
My thoughts. I didn't want you to keep hearing the ring. These are my thoughts. You are much more a student of economics than I am. I think we all know that the economic destruction that we're seeing is going to ripple out for a very long time. I don't know if it's really a partisan thing, blame the Democrats or Republicans. They came together in a rescue package very, very quickly. I think they made a lot of mistakes. I hope they remedy those in a fourth rescue package. We've seen way too many layoffs, not enough small business preservation and protection. Layoffs, as you know, beget more layoffs, and they ripple through the supply chain. They take away people's insurance and benefits, and they cause great anxiety and devastation. And I think that was probably should have been the instinct and the goal when they sat down to do the initial rescue packages. So I hope, like I said, that can be remedied. In terms of stay at home and social distancing, I know the government shouldn't be able to lock the nation down, but it certainly should encourage the 8 remaining governors who have not issued shelter in place to do so as soon as possible. The longer everyone is out getting infected, the longer all of us have to stay home, and the more economic devastation we're going to see as a result. So I really think it's a mistake to have not done this sooner and recommended it to all the governors in every state. So that's my thought on watching the health balance, the health versus economy balance. And I think if you look at the polling, it's really fascinating, Jimmy, to see how many Americans actually believe we have to protect our health and safety now in more dramatic ways and get to the economic repair later. And I think that's because as they see this hit their communities and hit their local hospitals, they're really worried about how long the infection explosion is going to last and how many deaths it will produce. They know that the sooner that we protect ourselves, the sooner we can protect the economy. And I was surprised to see that bear out in polling as soon as we did, but it's 3 in 4 Americans or more at this point.
Interesting. Well, let's talk a little bit about the political dynamics in play. A.B. Stoddard, our guest, again, Associate Editor at RealClearPolitics. Cut 3, we have Joe Biden yesterday talking about the timeline for the Democratic primary, which is still going on. Bernie Sanders still in the race, still trying to become the nominee for the Democratic Party. And also in this clip, you'll hear Biden talk a little bit about what is possible for the Democratic National Convention later this year.
Finally, sir, I want to turn to some politics before we go. As you know, Wisconsin now having its primary on Tuesday. Your opponent, Senator Sanders, has said that should be put off, and the governor now joined that chorus as well. But it looks like it's going to happen. Is that wise?
Well, look, I think they should just follow the science. What I've been hearing, I've been following like you have, like everybody has, watching the court action. Is still in court now, but I think whatever the science says is what we should do.
And does that hold for the convention as well? Are you open to the idea that it just may not be possible to do the convention in August?
Well, we're going to have to do a convention, may have to do a virtual convention. I think we should be thinking about that right now. The idea of holding a convention is going to be necessary, but we may not be able to put 10, 20, 30,000 people in one place, and that's very possible. Again, let's see where it is. What we do between now and then is going to dictate a lot of that as well. But my point is that I think you just got to follow the science. Listen to the experts. Listen to the Faucis of the world. And if that's the case, it's the case. But we cannot let this, we've never allowed any crisis from the Civil War straight through to the pandemic of 17, all the way around 16. We have never let our democracy take second fiddle. We can both have a democracy and elections and at the same time correct the public health.
I'd like you to respond to your thoughts on all of what he said there, A.B. Stoddard. But one thing that comes to mind, though, is that he says, follow the science. We should follow the science. Well, a leader, first of all, would say, here's what the science is telling me. Here's what I think we should do. Because to be frank, and I said this earlier in the show, the science is only as good as those who are interpreting the science, and then how it is actually put to use. It's not something where scientists can just say, hey, this is happening, because policymakers actually have to make decisions. Yet Joe Biden wasn't willing to stake claim one way or the other on the Wisconsin primary and so forth. So with that in mind as well, what did you make of it?
Right. Well, I'm actually really outraged that the Wisconsin primary is happening tomorrow and there's going to be in-person voting. It's incredibly irresponsible. It could have been delayed like the others to a point where we could get away from the curve of infection or, to a mail-in system. It's ridiculous. And I understand why candidates for president don't want to offend state parties and they don't want to say things like I just did. But I think the vice president is correct that a virtual convention is what both parties really should be planning for, in that This could still, without a national lockdown, be rippling through communities and places and be easily transmitted in August in huge arenas. We have a real potent problem with this virus and this outbreak in asymptomatic transmission. And that now I heard this morning, they believe up to 50% of people carrying it are not showing symptoms, not, the odd person 1 in 15 or something. And the idea that people are walking around able to infect people who are vulnerable is still really dangerous. And so when you listen to Dr. Fauci talk about the virus returning later, before we have a vaccine online, before we have therapeutic remedies to lessen the effects of the virus, we're still needing, ventilators and acute care. I think it's obviously a no-go, and that they would have one in August. He's saying listen to the science, meaning listen to what the experts are saying then. I guess he means in July or whenever they're going to make this decision. The president has not canceled the Republican National Convention, nor has the RNC, and they're going to have to weigh in on this question at some point too. But from here, from what we've seen in the last month, it sure seems like it's not possible.
Final question, A.B. Stoddard, before we let you go. I really appreciate your time today. You mentioned mail-in ballots. So on Friday, I asked former Colorado Secretary of State Wayne Williams to come on the show and talk about the pros and cons of switching over to all-mail ballots. Colorado was the third state to implement all-mail balloting. Now, people can still go and vote at vote centers and what have you, but we were the third after Washington and Oregon. And it seems to me that it's really difficult, except maybe expanding absentee balloting. That could be the way to do it in the short run. But to expect these states to be able to successfully implement secure, mail-focused balloting in a short span of time by the 2020 election in November, let alone for those states that have primaries in the next few months. So how quickly do you think we could actually make such a switch?
Okay, so I lost part of your audio, but I heard the end. And essentially, the experts that I have interviewed on this, and they're not many, and this is also new, obviously there's a real push to change the general election to all mail-in. Many states already have it. They have their systems up and running. Transitioning, though, as you point out, from a non-mail-in state to all mail-in is really difficult. And what they're saying to me about the timing is if it's not done by the end of May, it might not be possible to do it. There's a whole chain of events that have to happen. You have to make sure all your addresses are still good, that the voters are educated, that they will be mailing in their ballots, and that they will be expected to sign in the proper place, make sure they've filled it out correctly. In the pandemic emergency, are they actually even living at home? Maybe they've gone to a significant other's residence for the foreseeable future. Will they be picking up their mail? That's the problem with transitioning during the primary season. So getting these systems in places, getting everything printed, changing some laws. I think Connecticut's constitution currently wouldn't permit it. There's a lot of red tape. But I think that our democracy really depends on a full-throated bipartisan effort in this direction. And I think it's really beyond disappointing. It's disturbing to see Republicans attempting to block this in certain places, and the president saying that it would incite cheating. We have a hackable system right now that, any system connected to the internet is hackable. So our system now is not safe. Mail-in is going to ensure that we get enough of a turnout in this election, Jimmy, that we don't end up with a low turnout election where people were afraid to be in public places getting infected, and a turnout that is so pitiful that people disregard the result and don't see it as credible. That's a worst case scenario. I think we should all get together to make sure that doesn't happen.
Well, I'll say this, that when we first switched over here in Colorado, where we're broadcasting from, to mail-in ballot state, becoming that kind of a state, we had built up over time, more and more people were wanting ballots at home, and then it was, okay, let's just do this carte blanche to everybody. And I had some of those concerns, like voter fraud and whatnot. I think for the most part that's been alleviated, that the system can be done if you have the time to do it, though, and you put all the security in place and have those systems that have worked in other states work well in your state and apply them. I think it can be done, and I would encourage it if it's possible in particular states logistically to make that switch. The challenge, though, is in being able to make the switch in a short span of time, as we were talking about. But I'm not opposed to the idea here in Colorado anymore. I think it's worked pretty well.
Yeah, where it's worked well, it's paved the way that this is a system we should embrace in a time of crisis and an outbreak where the public health is at stake. As you said, it's going to take time, but we could overcome the time crunch with the proper resources and the political will, and it's just going to take both parties taking it much more seriously to get it done.
A.B. Stoddard, Associate Editor at RealClearPolitics. It's always so great to talk with you. Thanks so much for joining us, and I hope you're doing well, and I hope you stay well and healthy.
You as well. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Again, A.B. Stoddard joining us from RealClearPolitics here on Jimmy at the Crossroads. It's always great to check in with A.B. She is a very thoughtful person, and I appreciate her perspective. But I do want to wrap up here because I didn't play this clip in the beginning of the show when I gave my opening monologue expressing concern about how long this could go after April. In cut 11, we have Ronald Reagan, who I think is one of the greatest presidents that this nation has ever had. Among the top few, top two, top three presidents, most likely, I would put Ronald Reagan in there. And he had his note about the 9 most terrifying words in the English language. Here's what he said they were.
I think you all know that I've always felt the 9 most terrifying words in the English language are, I'm from the government and I'm here to help.
He had many truisms, and that's top among the truisms. Because while I understand that the government needs to take particular initiative here, in many cases, to slow the spread and flatten the curve, we need steps to be taken. At the same time, the idea that we can simply rely upon the government out for months on end to provide for our needs, to help us, is untenable. And I don't trust it. Again, fine with through April. But after we get past April, I think we've got to start opening up in smart ways, sure, but opening up our economy once again. Because we cannot look to the government who comes to us and says, I'm from the government and I'm here to help. Because those are terrifying words to hear. Because we cannot trust that the U.S. federal government is going to be able to take care of us, let alone that they even should take care of us, because they should not. We are a society that is rooted in self-reliance, rooted in individual liberty, rooted in the idea of unleashing the unlimited potential of each and every individual. Right now, understandably, we're constrained, but the idea of a governor like Ralph Northam in Virginia saying, guess what, folks? We're having this order effective till June 10th. Or other states considering maybe going out into September or what have you. That is not feasible, not tenable, and we should not be looking to that. The idea that the government can just help us is not one I believe, not one we should believe as Americans, particularly in the long term. We have what we've got now for this month of April. We need to heed Reagan's words moving forward. I want to hear it one more time, Nathan Matoush, please. One more time, play Ronald Reagan in the 1980s talking about the 9 most terrifying words.
I think you all know that I've always felt the 9 most terrifying words in the English language are, I'm from the government and I'm here to help.
And then let's also heed his words in cut 12, what he had to say about what is the real problem.
In this present crisis, government is not the solution to our problem. Government is the problem. It is time to reawaken this industrial giant, to get government back within its means, and to lighten our punitive tax burden. And these will be our first priorities, and on these principles there will be no compromise.
Once this crisis has abated, those are the words we should heed and be looking to unleash the unlimited potential of each and every individual in our private sector economy, not looking to government, Republican, Democrat, whomever, to be the saviors, because that just can't happen. That is it for us today. Thank you so much for joining us on this Monday, April 6th. We'll see what we've got in store as the week continues, but day in and day out, we will work hard to bring you engaging, intelligent talk, Sang style, as we make sense out of nonsense in partnership with the Washington Examiner, talking about where politics and economics collide, and that is Jimmy at the Crossroads, where politics and economics collide. There are so many facets to our discussions, and we cannot ignore one or two of them. We have to bring all into the picture. So with that, I leave you today, but I bid you a good day. Have a great one. Be well, be healthy, stay safe and sound. Enjoy your time with family, even in the midst of all this quarantine chaos, because always remember, God will bless.